Got it. Okay, so let me scroll up to the top of the lesson here. So today we are going to talk about the role of performance. Is this the one?
No.
Nope, that was last week. Section 2. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, restart. So the topic today is the role of the teacher in achieving first century competency. I'm going to make the screen bigger so everyone can see. Done. That was not what I meant. Present. That's the button I was looking for. Okay. So the role of the teacher in achieving 21st century competency-based learning. So last time we talked about working towards an assessment, and today we're going to talk about our role in facilitating learning through competency-based learning, basically through. So let's just move on to the next slide. So I have an agenda for today. I just want to briefly kind of touch on the things that we're going to go over. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to just minimize the screen so you can see what's on it. So let me see what's in the chat too. Okay, I don't see it yet. So that was in Chinese, so I'm not going to address that. So student-driven learning. So I think we all learn best from participating in our own learning, or most of us do. Some learn very well by absorbing when someone speaks and just taking notes and doing their own learning that way. But most of us want to be engaged in some way. So we're going to start with an engagement activity today. We're going to talk about how to structure a classroom and lessons to engage students so that they understand the relevance of what they're learning. Last time we met, we talked about introducing the rubric and the assessment criteria and the end goal so that they see the relevance. Today, we're going to talk about activities we use in the classroom to engage students in their own learning. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the text that you got this a couple of days ago I sent, or day before yesterday, maybe 24 hours ago, I don't know. That is from a text called Language Awareness. So if you're teaching 11th and 9 through 12, that's a really good book to get. I may have to search it and put it in the chat later. I'm not sure if I put it in. There's a link here to a shared folder that I've shared with Yoru, so she can give you the materials for this lesson from today. And then we're going to talk, I have a few things I want to talk about briefly. The role of lecture in the classroom, meaning lecture is, when we speak in front of a class and teach something. And what the benefits of knowing your students and their personalities, their learning styles, how they work with other kids, such things. The role of the teacher in the classroom group work. So we're going to go over that a little bit now in the first 20 minutes. The flipped classroom, I don't know if any of you have heard this term or what you know about this term, the flipped classroom, but it's basically front loading or giving out texts or recording yourself in a video and before class, and then have the activities in class. Any questions? No, okay. And then we talked last time about the exit ticket and short surveys. So we'll address that too. And the final thoughts, no need to reinvent the wheel. That means we don't have to come up with all of our own materials from scratch, from the beginning every time. I don't, I borrow, I share. like today, we share it with each other. So to make our jobs easier, because online and social media educator communities are helpful. And I belong to Facebook groups that of teachers that teach my subject, for example, and maybe you have different groups in China. So, and then the text suggestion, language awareness I talked about. So let's see. So engagement activity, engagement means the students are actively engaged in their learning, and that's the purpose of that. Somebody has a microphone on. If it's a little loud behind you, maybe turn it off for now. Okay, so let's go into the learning activity. This is a sample, and it is obviously from my class, because this is, you know, I focus on the things that I teach myself. So for those of you who don't teach language, I hope you can take some of it and think about the things that you can take away from. So we'll talk about what it is, what the value was of this activity afterwards. There's a link to a Prezi presentation. I'm not sure if you have the ability to use Prezi in China. There's some, I know some things you don't have, like Google Docs, which I use a lot. And there's a link to PDF text here, which is the text that you did, and then the lesson plans I've shared also later. Somebody has a microphone on. If you can turn, if you hear it's loud behind you, maybe you can turn your microphone off. There, yes.
You could mute them. Could you?
I can mute them.
Yes.
Okay, so let me do that.
I think it's a 12. I don't know who she is. The 12.
I'm looking. 12. I see. Okay, so I need to see it in this way, I think.
On the right side of the participant name list, you can mute.
Oh, okay. Go to the name list.
Yes.
I see. Mute. There we go. All right. So I have muted, and let's move on. Oops. And I'm going to go to the screen here. All right. Or the screen here. So now want to keep the screen open. So I'm going to click on this now and go into the Prezi presentation. So what I would like you to do is, because we're not talking together for these lessons, and normally I have taught this in a class where the students raise their hand and they speak their list. So instead, if you can use the chat function here and write the vocabulary words, then you can think of. Also, the text that I sent you ahead of time today, I shared with you because most of you, English is not your first language. And I wanted to give you, because some of the words are complex, and I wanted to give you a head start. But with my students, I haven't given them the text ahead of time when I have taught it to 11th and 12th graders, because it's a short text and they can read it in 5 minutes in class. So you will also have noticed on the text that I shared with you, let me go back here for a second to the link. Oops, that was the wrong PowerPoint again. I'm going to click out of that. And so what you will notice on this PDF here is I have also taken some of the words on the right hand here and taken them out and highlighted here. And that's also a good strategy with your students if you have difficult vocabulary, to give them a little bit of a head start by defining some of the words so that they can read and not have to go into it to look up every word. And especially because I normally teach this in the classroom. Okay, so without further ado, we'll go into the PowerPoint, the Prezi here. So this is I like to mix up my my presentation software because I think there is I think students get used to things and then they get bored of it. And so changing it up a little bit is usually good. So what I would like you to do, we're beginning now. What I would like for you to do is take normally, well, this is a classroom and now you're not working in pairs, you're working on your own. So take a couple of minutes. We're not going to take 3 minutes because we have limited time. And you're going to take and think of and list of animal vocabulary you can think of used to describe woman. So words for animals that we use to describe women. Now, because you also speak Chinese, I would also think about words in your own language, but also in English, if you know English well enough to know this, okay? So take a couple of minutes to do that. I'm gonna give you a minute to do that now. So write it down and put it in the chat, okay? So write your words in a chat, animal vocabulary for women. I don't see any words in the chat yet. I don't see anybody chatting. Oh, I see some messages now. Good. So I'm going to move on to the next slide before we go on. Oh, good. Lots of people are adding words here. Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide in the interest of time. So take 3 minutes now to write down all the animal vocabulary you can think of to describe boys or men. Now, don't you worry if it's in the same chat. I'm going to start from the top and move to the bottom. All right. I see a few there. Okay, so now I would tell my students to work with another pair. So I normally have my students do this in two people together. And then they write a list together, they talk about it, and that way they get engaged because they have to exchange the information, right? And then I tell them after they've come up with a list for boys and men and girls and women, animal vocabulary that describes both, I ask them to compare their list and talk about it and talk about these questions. How do we use language differently when we're talking about men and women? And what do we associate with the animal words that we use? So why do we use certain animal words for women and certain animal words for men? And what does it say about how we see women, how we see men, and how we engender stereotypes, right? Do we attribute different characteristics sometimes to the same animal related word that when we speak about men and women? So I'm going to go to your list now. Pig, yes. So we started with women. This one here is in Chinese, so I can't read that, but I think that was a message to begin. So rabbit, cat, bunny, deer, yes. Fox, yes. Swan, yes. Mermaid, yes. We panda. Oh, that must be from China. Kingfisher, catfish, panda. Okay, so let's start with the top of the list here. Rabbit. So we don't usually use the word rabbit but we use the word bunny, and bunny is cute, right? Cat. What do we associate with a cat? For a woman, usually it's kitty, or there's a term called sex kitten, for example, which is suggesting that she's cute. Bunny, yes. Deer, doe-eyed deer, meaning the eyes of a deer. So that is like cute and young and pretty. Fox. Okay, that's an interesting word because that in English is used for both men and women, but it has a different meaning. So when a woman is a fox, normally my students would engage with this, but since we're not doing this over audio, they would say, well, they will discuss what do these things really mean. So for a woman, when she's a fox, that means she's hot. For a man, when he's a fox, it's often used with silver fox, meaning an older man who is stylish, right? So it has a slightly different meaning. A swan is a beautiful woman, but you wouldn't use that necessarily for a man, right? I don't know about panda and kingfisher. And catfish, panda, those are from terms from Chinese. I'm very curious because in the US, it has very, some of the same words. Like, for example, somebody put pig somewhere. Maybe that's for men. So when you call a woman a dog, for example, that means in the US that she's ugly. But when you mean, or in English speaking world, that she's ugly. But when you talk about a man is a dog, that means she sleeps around, he's promiscuous. So we have these stereotypes based on what we associate with the animal, but they're different for men and women. Why is that? Why do we use different words? So the intention of this exercise is to get the students thinking about the vocabulary we use and whether the vocabulary we use, if we use it consciously, is it sexist, or is there gender stereotypes embedded in our language, right? Are we associating different animals or animal qualities with women than we are with men, because we have certain preconceived notions about how women should be and how men should be. And is that a problem? So deer, fox, swan, let's see here. I can't speak to panda. I can't speak to kingfisher, but if you were to discuss this among yourself, I am pretty sure that you have certain associations with these words, right? They mean something other than the animal itself. So think about that. What does it mean? And how does that relate to how we see women, how we see ourselves, and how we see men? Phoenix, especially in the Chinese culture. I know. Interesting. It's a very interesting bird. I don't exactly know what it means, if it means some freedom or a threat of some kind. Butterfly, peacock. Oh, peacock. So peacock is a man that is show off, right? That is a little too show offy in English. I don't know. Tiger, eagle, lion. often used for men in the English language to symbolize predatory animals, right? That they're danger. Let's see, we talked about dog. I talked about dog for both men and women. It's so interesting to me, the different animal vocabulary that you use, because it is different. A little, and I'm so different association, right? Bear. So a bear of a man is like a really big man, like a hairy man in the US. I'm looking here. Wolf, interesting, and pig. Let's talk about wolf and pig. So wolf is a predatory animal, usually associated with males in the US and in the English-speaking world. And it's associated with, there was a movie, I don't know if you have seen Wolf of Wall Street, right? And it suggests somebody who is carving something for themselves. A pig is used mostly for men. It's actually sometimes used as a derogatory bad word for police in the US, but it's also used if a woman is called a pig, it has a different meaning. It means that she is ugly again or gross. Hound, horse, let's see, pig, wolf, pig, ox. Ox of a man, always associated with, it's also a male animal. One word that I haven't seen, somebody knows about silver fox, old man. And one thing that I find interesting is, let me see here. Gender stereotype, let's see here. There was something I found. Oh yeah, the word bitch is actually, I don't know if you all know that actually means, it's a derogatory word in English for a woman. It means that she's mean, cranky, not nice person. But it's also the word for a female dog, right? So there's a pattern, as you saw in the reading that you read for today. And the pattern is that we tend to associate in English cutesy young animals with young women, right? And older women get less cute animals and less, like for example, or a predatory animal, cougar, that's a kind of a mountain lion that is used for older women. Because as an older woman who wants to find younger men, she's predatory, right? Whereas sex kitten is a young woman, or bunny is a young woman, right? So we associate cute things with young women, and predatory and ugly animals or older animals with older women. Like for example, sometimes you could use the word she's a whale, right? That means she's a big woman. That's a mean thing to say. So the pattern is that also for men, it's usually more predatory animals and animals that have some strength, and animals that are sexually promiscuous, and it tends to have a positive connotation for men, but not for women. Okay, so I'm very curious whether it is the same in China or different. I know you have some different animals. So that's the lesson, and this usually we're going to go through fast because I want to move on to the rest of my presentation. But the point is here, through this beginning a class with an activity like this, it gets students thinking about how we use language to, and how our sexism and misogyny and stereotypes is embedded in our language. It is part of our language. So if you didn't read the excerpt We're not going to do it now because many of you have. So it is from this book called Language Awareness by Paul Eschaltz and a few other people. And it's a collection of texts that I've used extensively in my English class because they're short and they have a point about how language conveys meaning. And that is part, for all of our English teaching, that is really what we're teaching. When we're teaching reading, we're analyzing how the language conveys the meaning, how the sentences are structured, the vocabulary used, the way a story is told, all of these things. So then I would ask, because I have taught this in an international classroom, I start with English and then I ask my students to describe how do you use animal vocabulary in men to describe men or women in other languages you speak, because I work in an international classroom. And that also is a very interesting conversation among my students, because I see often in at least within the Northern Europe, in the European world, in the Americas, in India, and most of the English-speaking world, this is true. The patterns hold true for these, for all of the languages within Europe, really. So I don't know if it's true but I do think for most of my Chinese students in class, they have seen a similar pattern of how the words are associated differently with men and women. And you can use something similar like this in other features of our language, right? So then that's the end. So then I go a little bit, then I ask this question: what do you think could be the historical and cultural reasons for us humans using animal and farm vocabulary to describe human attributes and qualities? And I haven't given them the text yet at this point. So the farm vocabulary you will learn from the text comes from the fact that we as humans lived on farms not that long ago, and our language is much older than we are. So my grandparents lived on a farm. My mom grew up on the farm. And so we were closer to these animals when we were just 100 years back, or even 50. So we have this language that we used a long time ago that is still embedded in our language today, even though many of us live in cities now. So that's it for our lesson. TOK connection is a different subject that I teach, but I like to connect the subject. So she argues that language reflects and solidifies deeply ingrained cultural attitudes. So by using this sexist language, we perpetuate it, we continue it. So if that is true, is there hope that prejudice can be reduced by altering the language? That's a question I pose to my students, and that's a critical thinking skill, which we talked about last time when we met, that I want my students to think about the language that they use in my language class. Okay, so we're going to go back. So the link to the text is here. The lesson plan, a detailed lesson plan is there, and the Prezi presentation. And if you can't link it, we will figure it out. You and I will figure out how to share this with you. So what was the purpose of this activity? Well, at the beginning of class, it's good to activate the students' prior knowledge about the language they had heard, read, and used, to think critically about the language we use in daily life, right? Because we want, when our students go out into the world and read and watch things and hear things, we want them to really think about the language that they are being communicated, that they use in communication. They engage in their own learning by asking them, they engage in their own by asking them to think about how they use language and discuss it among their friends and peers, meaning students, other students in the class. And then your role here is to provide varied activities to engage students in learning, right? So this is an activity in which students have to come to an understanding like this themselves, but I'm not telling them that this language is sexist. I'm not telling them that this language is misogynistic. I want them to discover it on their own. So, and then also it gives them a chance to say what they see. And always there is one or two very bright kids in the class who will be the first one to notice, right? Wait a minute. I see a pattern here. I see these words are used for women and these words are used for men, right? And this is different. So that's the purpose of this activity. So how to structure a lesson to engage students so that they understand the relevance of what they are learning. So I talked last time about how I'd like to introduce the end goal first, the rubric. The role of the teacher in the competency-based learning model is as a facilitator of student learning. So what I did just now, I didn't tell them. They figured it out for themselves, as you did too when you were looking at these words, probably. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So I tried to think about still, what's the end goal? What do I want them to truly understand on their own without me telling them? And I try to strategize the curriculum that I have and the lessons. So I plan ahead, maybe a whole unit for a month in advance. And I do it loosely on a piece of paper or a single document, how each unit kind of builds towards this end goal, which is often the assessment, right? We give them a test at the end that they're all scared about. So we need to kind of plan a whole unit, a month in advance. Then we figured out all the little parts in how they're going to get there. And there's one way to do that is scaffolding, meaning you build. And so if you were here for my last lesson, you would see that I had some strategies for how to build towards this end goal. Which is I'm going to mute the somebody here, I think. Is this it? Yeah, I think so. Okay. So so we need to scaffold, meaning build towards the end goal of what we want them to learn in a unit. And in this unit, I would say it would be, to become aware of the words that we use, to become aware of the language that we use and how language conveys the meaning that we want, right? So, but we also need to consider one more thing. So we talked about scaffolding last time. This time I want to talk a little bit about differentiated learning strategies. And that's a big word, big sentence, big word. So differentiation means tailoring instruction, meaning planning your instruction, meaning planning your lessons to meet students' individual needs, because your students are all different and they all learn differently. When that makes it difficult sometimes to have all the students learn what you want them to learn, because you have, as teachers, limited amount of time. And but there is some value in trying to target different students in different ways. So when I teach one thing, I don't usually teach it in one way only. Whether teachers differentiate content, meaning the actual material. So content is If you're a chemistry teacher, you want them to learn some particular formulas, right? And how do you teach them that? You may want to try a few different ways. Process, how to do something, right? You may want to teach them a few different ways in math, for example. There may be more than one process, and one student may get one way and another student doesn't, but they see things because we have different kinds of learners. Or the learning environment. We may want to change the learning environment. Maybe you want to change your groups, maybe, and then we also want to test formative assessment, meaning not assessment that comes in the end, but we want to test if they're learning it. Like we want to give them a little survey sometimes, or a little way to figure out what they understand, what they truly understand, and maybe a quiz, maybe a quiz that isn't graded or that they can improve on, so that the assessment isn't scary. It doesn't feel like a threat, but it's part of the learning. And flexible grouping, that means knowing your students, pairing them up, grouping them in particular groups that you think in which students will work well together. Or if there are certain students that have a difficult time, maybe move them around a little bit to see what works. So that's targeting different learners. So the role of lecture in the classroom, and this is ironic to me because this is what I am doing right now. I am lecturing, and I hear when I'm in a classroom full of teenagers, I don't want to hear my voice this much as I am right now because I know my students, they have a short attention span. They don't like to listen to me talk the whole lesson. And so, but I also know that I know a lot more than they do about how language conveys meaning. So my rule of thumb is to avoid lecturing or explaining more than 10 minutes at the beginning of class, because I have noticed, especially on the online, when I have been teaching online, that my students' eyes glaze over, they get bored, they start looking down. They may have a phone hidden under the table. I don't know if your Chinese students do this, but my American students do sometimes. So I have a phone tree, I have the phones in the wall, right? But also I need them to listen and I don't expect them to listen more than 10 minutes. So how do we balance teaching what we know and facilitating students learning what we want them to know in a limited amount of time? Get them involved in classroom activities like to this one, where they immediately apply and use what you have taught them after that first lesson, right? We want them to know this right away. We want them to use what you have lectured right away, so that they can practice, because that's a really good way of learning, is to practice and doing yourself or in groups, or figuring it out interpersonally with peers, meaning other students. So yeah, so here's some definition. Lecture is an oral presentation intended to present information or teach people about a particular subject. And rule of thumb, that's just a definition because that's an expression in English. I'm going to move on to the next. So differentiation requires creative lesson planning. That means you have to kind of think about, what are my students like, and how can this student who is dyslexic learn this? Or how can this student who has attention deficit disorder learn this? Or how can the student who only learns through images learn this? So we have students who learn by hearing, musical learners. We have visual and spatial learners. So I put in this image here to help you think about how the different ways we learn. We have verbal learners that learn through speaking and listening. We have logical and mathematical learners who like a very step-by-step structured approach. And then we have physical and kinesthetic learners who learn by touching and doing, right? And social and interpersonal, who like to learn in a group or with other people, figuring things out in a group, which is great for working in a company later on, right? It's a good skill to have. And solitary and intrapersonal learners. So solitary meaning they learn best on their own. And how do we target all of these different students in a classroom of 20 to 40? It's hard, right? And you know this because you're all teachers. So you know this as much as I do, that this is not an easy task we have, but we still have to do our best and try. So let's look at the animal vocabulary activity, how that targeted different types of learners today. It didn't target every kind in every way for sure, because that's impossible. But I use of imagery in the presentation for visual learners. So you noticed I had an image for girl vocabulary. I had an image for boy vocabulary. I had an image for the farm animals, to kind of put that in their mind, because most of us are actually very visual in our learning. And to see something also, for example, in some of your other subjects, like if you have a chemical formula in chemistry, you need to experiment. The students need to experiment to see for themselves what happens, right? Or if you have a mathematical formula that you can use in physics, seeing how it works helps you understand it, right? So there's all of these different ways of learning that we have to go. Visual, these are the three main categories. I get visual, how what you see, auditory, what you hear, and kinesthetic, meaning touching, doing it yourself. So writing a list of vocabulary words used for men and women, solitary learners, for you guys now, were you women and men who have just done this, because you had to come up with your own list. Discussing the list of words with peers, meaning other students, interpersonal, social, and verbal learners. They discuss, they listen, they expand their list, they discuss when those words are used, right? Reading the excerpt, that's solitary, you have to read on your own, unless some students have a hard time reading and then they listen to audiobooks, for example. So reading the excerpt out loud may be an option for some students to have it read to them. And that's verbal learners. And discussing the background for the vocabulary words, that's logical, right? Why do we do this? So that is cause and effect, and that targets logical learners. So you can't do it all, but you can do your best, right? So variety of exercises is always good because it helps them. Next slide. Know your students so they can help each other succeed. So make note of when they first enter your classroom, you may not know them yet, but I usually keep a mental note, and sometimes I keep track of my interactions with some students. I don't know how big your classrooms are, and the larger your classroom is, the harder it is. And if your students are shy or quiet, it is also more difficult. But so make note of your students' personalities, strengths, and where there is room for improvement. Your classroom is your laboratory. Your classroom is where you try things out, see what works, see what doesn't, and pay attention and see what you need to sometimes reteach in a different way because the first way didn't work. That has happened to me. It happens every year. And sometimes it happens one class. If I teach the same material to one class and another class, they may not get it the same way. So it makes it difficult, but it is possible to try. Our jobs is to try the best we can to target all of our students, so all of them. get it. And when my students are in groups, I observe them. I don't sit at my desk. I walk around, I listen to what they say. So when they were working in pairs on this exercise, I walked around, I kind of listened to see what they were saying. And then I listened again when they got together in a bigger group, when there was, so the first 2, then they were 4. And then depending on the class, sometimes I put in 3 first and then 6. It depends on the size of the class. And then I move around and I listen. And sometimes I have a suggestion, and sometimes I nod and smile because I want to affirm that what they're saying is valid so that they feel comfortable, right? So over the course of a year, I really get to know them. Some of them come to see me after class and ask questions. Some of them never do. Some of them are always late. Some of them pay attention. Some of them don't, right? But I try to, even when they are, not, even when I have a hard time really understanding who they are, I sometimes ask someone to stay behind so I get to discuss something with them, because if I do, they are more likely to be responsive to me later. And that's my role, to develop a relationship with them, because if they're feeling safe with me in the classroom, then they are more likely to say what they really feel and think, and not be afraid to speak up. So group your students based on how you think they will work together. Sometimes I let friends work together. Sometimes it devolves into other things, and then I mix them up. Switch the groups up to get them comfortable with change and allow them for new dynamics. It's not always fair to put, a very strong student with a weaker student in a class because you want the stronger student to teach the weaker student. We have to mix it up. So pair students up, sometimes a shy student with an outgoing student, sometimes a struggling student with a strong student, sometimes let friends work together, sometimes keeps distracted students apart. I often do that. That's a strategy I use. And in my American classroom, that is always the strategy I use. Pay attention to what works and what doesn't in the class, and what groups work well together and which don't. So sometimes students have bad days too, and nothing is static. So it doesn't, just because they didn't work well together one day doesn't mean that they're not good to work together another day. But pay attention. Back. How do I go back? So then again, here's a last tip. So these are kind of tips for the classroom. Thought-provoking, open-ended questions. I usually keep a few at hand because I want them to, because if all else fails, I can always ask a question that gets them thinking. So keep a list of thought-provoking questions to get your students engaged in the class for every class. So older students, here's an example for the lesson we just did. What is the role of culture in shaping language? With younger students, you can ask, do you have special words you use only with some people, like your family or best friends, right? Because most of us use different language at home and with our friends, or students use different vocabulary with their teachers than they do with their friends, right? Older students, I would ask, how are we influenced by the language we use? To get them thinking about, I don't know, like we've just after this lesson here, am I influenced by calling a woman a dog? Am I influenced by calling a woman a bunny, right? What is that? How does that shape my thoughts about that woman, right? And younger students, you can ask, are there words that make you feel good or words that make you feel bad? What is it about those words that make you feel good or bad, right? So it gets them thinking about how they listen, on what words they use and what words they hear, and connected to, you know, how it is to be them in the world. So how is the vocabulary you use different with the different groups you belong to? For example, teachers, parents, peers, neighborhood. That's a great question to ask students, because most of them, at least in America and an English speaking world, they'll have different vocabulary they use in different situations. And that's good, but it's good to also be aware of it, that we switch. It's called code switching. It's a word for it in English, code switching, meaning changing the code of the language you use in order to be accepted and in a particular community. So that's why students use more formal vocabulary at school and less formal vocabulary with friends, and sometimes a completely different dialect at home. So last time we met, let me see here, is there a message here? I'm just gonna checking if, okay. Oh, oops, I just wanted to make sure that, okay. So last time we met, we talked about do now activities at the beginning of class. Sometimes this is a good place to start those, to ask those thought-provoking, open-ended questions to get students thinking about what they are about to learn. And also at the end, in the exit ticket. We talked about that last time, so I'm not going to go over that so much today, but it's in my last presentation. So finally, I'm just checking the time here, 2:56. Okay, I'm almost done. So here is a video. I don't know if you can access it, but a flipped classroom is an instructional strategy and a type of blended learning, which aims to increase student engagement in learning by having them complete readings at their own, at their home and work. So they basically, you teach by recording yourself in a video or give them a reading, and then they do the work, the group work, the pair work, the individual work while you walk around, and you can answer questions in the classroom. So it's the opposite of teaching in the room, but that gives you more time to try different strategies in the classroom. So share reading exercises ahead of time. You can share vocabulary definitions that you want in terms or concepts that you want them to know ahead of time. And you can record yourself. So this is a recording of me. I'm going to stop it really quickly, but I'm teaching the PI method, which is a way to structure paragraphs.
We couldn't hear the voice, Prezi.
Oh, okay. I see. That's okay. I don't really want to go there. I would have to pull out my headphones, but I'm a little afraid it's going to change the settings in my computer. So I can share it with you later. Is that okay? If you're able to. So it's basically, I just wanted to give you to show you what is possible. So you can basically teach something on a video, record yourself. And if you see in this video, I'll just scroll forward. I share my screen, I do the whole presentation throughout. It's just a sample of this particular method to structure paragraphs. And I can share that with you after too, if you want to see it, the actual document. And because we're running out of time here, so the exit ticket and short surveys. Finally, this is the last thing. Last time we talked about this, I'm not going to talk about it again, but it basically solidifies student learning by asking lesson-specific question about what they have learned that day, because the more ways we as human learns on multiple fronts, we need to take things in more than one way. First we hear it, then we do it, then we think about it, right? And by doing it on all these ways, we really learn something better than just hearing it one way. And gives you information, and it also gives you, the teacher, information about what they've learned that day, so you can tailor your next lesson. Because if you ask them a question and ask them to write out an answer, and you collect the answers and read, you don't have to read 40 answers, you can read 10, and see what they say. And if they got those, if you got the lesson, then you know that you can move on to the next unit. If nobody got it, then you have to do it again in some other way. Okay. So time management, teachers are asked to do a lot. We're all learn at different paces and in different ways. And when I have a classroom full of students that have different understandings and abilities, you need to just pay attention to what they get, what they don't, using these tools that we have talked about, and be flexible and adjust our lessons. We can't just, plan a month ahead and do all our lessons the same way every time. Every class is different, and sometimes they don't get it. And then we have to do it in a different way. So no two students are alike, no two classrooms are alike. I have almost every year, I have two different classes teaching the exact same thing, and they are wide apart in what they know. So we have all taught the same material in this way, and we know how do we adjust. Be kind to yourself as teachers, because everyone has an unsuccessful lesson, happens to me every year. And I think of it as a learning opportunity. And I'm curious about why, right? I want to know why it didn't work. I think about why it didn't work. I usually come up with a reason why it didn't work. And then I do it again in a different way. And also use the internet. There's great resources. I'll share some with you right now. Because starting something from scratch is time consuming. So I usually share with other teachers. Here are some resources that in the links, everything we learned from colleagues. So I hear STEAM teaching recommendations from a college who's been teaching STEAM for decades. Story building teaching tool from a colleague. That's a visual communication, which is good for English learners and English language learners. Story building teaching tool. Games and quizzes. I shared these three with you last time, and they're basically a way for you to create a game and a quiz. Kahoot, I use all the times because the students love it, and you can steal other teachers' Kahoots, steal other teachers' materials, copy it, change it to fit your own students in any way you want. And then for IB teachers, because I know there's a couple of you there, this is a subscription. I think it's $100 or $200 a year, so it's expensive, but you get multiple teachers on an account like that. So if you're new to teaching IB, or if you have questions, this is an amazing resource. And also this one, Teachers Pay Teachers. There you pay for individual lessons, but there's low fee, and it's other teachers' material that they have shared and to buy, and it's cheap. So that's it. I'm going to open up the screen now. Does anyone have any questions? You can put it in the chat.
现在问答时间，老师有问题的话可以上麦，或者是在 chat box 里面提问。
Hi, right. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, right?
Birgitta, that's okay. I don't know how
okay.
to pronounce your name either.
I'm a student at Teachers College, Columbia University. So I think many of the things like Kahoot, exit ticket, I also experienced in my professor's class. But I have a question about how to apply the strategies into classroom of younger students, like primary students, grade 1, they are 6 or 7 years old, like the extra ticket and short service. I think it's very important for teachers to get these things from the student to improve our classroom. But I think as the children, they are so young, I think they might not have the patience to finish the exit tickets or surveys, and maybe they have problems in understanding the questions in the surveys, and they just write something very not so relevant or just very cute way. So I wonder whether exit tickets and short surveys are perfect for older learners, but for like kindergarten or grade 1 students, they are not so necessary.
It's a very good question. So, you know, I mean, I went back to the slide here because it's more different. I would ask these questions of the students, literally. I would ask them in class and have them say it, maybe, or I would maybe, I mean, I honestly I've been teaching mostly high school, but the other thing is you can, you know, a word usually has a positive or a negative connotation. So you can have them also draw a word. How would that word look? You know, whether is it, what color would you draw it? Because we associate visually with the colors, right? And shapes. So that's another way. And for students in that age group, that we don't expect them to think about how culture shapes language. we want them to think about the language that they use and that they hear and what it means, right? And that's as much as they need to know at that age. So that's what so for a do now and exit ticket, I kind of agree with you. I think a do now would be a good thing in the beginning of the class. An exit ticket, I would maybe, you know, have them, you can also have them do a game, right? Where they click a button, you know, so that would maybe be an easier way to do that kind of an exit ticket in a survey. But, you know, I don't know, there's different, you know, like I have a teacher friend who has the red, green, blue, and yellow buttons that mean in the classroom where they hit them and they mean different things. I think that's a really interesting way to do it too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Thank you. Great college, by the way. I have a lot of colleagues who went there.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, then we're going to finish for today. We're a little over time already, so I will talk with you, Erin, if there's anything else I need to provide after today's lesson. But we will. It was very nice doing this with you, and it's been fun. So thank you for listening to me. And there should be a recording of my other presentation if you weren't there for that. Okay.